Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's ad hoc DWG Rail seminar meeting. My name is Barraj Atwal from the Programme Coordinator team. Just some housekeeping rules. All attendees will be muted throughout to minimise background noise. May you also check that you are on mute, please. If you wish to raise any questions or concerns throughout the course of the meeting, please use the raise hand function or message the host directly using the chat function. On the agenda for this meeting, we have the rail inquiries within GES, RECO Code Manager update, and AOB. I will now hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, Barraj. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining this follow-up. As we discussed on Tuesday, it seems a long time ago now. It was only Tuesday. I thought it was a really good session then, and I thought, we need to do the remaining agenda items justice and so on. So we'll have this additional session. We've scheduled 2 hours for it, which I'm hopeful should be ample. What I did want to do before we start was just bring the meeting up to date with an issue that we spoke around at the Transition Readiness Group meeting with programme parties yesterday morning. So Barraj, if we can jump to the AOB slide, and actually before I do that, are there any AOBs actually that anyone wants to raise? I'm not seeing anything. So if there are any AOBs or anything, if you put it through the chat, that will be helpful. So we'll move on to the next slide. As I mentioned yesterday at the Transition Readiness Group meeting, an issue has been identified with the display of the order of components of some longer and more complex addresses. Now, looking at this, it actually accounts, when we're looking at the numbers, around about 1% of addresses. It's a small number of addresses when you actually view them in the portal on EASE or GES. And basically, what we convened as per the programme's end-to-end cutover and approach and plan ECAP, we have an issue resolution group. So we convened that as an urgent meeting to look to resolve this and understand the issue. And effectively, we've agreed a solution, which is a change to be made to the inquiry services insofar as the web portal, so the portal use. And effectively, it changes the display order. What I've done here is pull together a table which shows the change. So from EES, effectively, it's changing from the current order of address elements that are received from CSS. It's swapping around street 1, street 2, locality 1, locality 2. I've got some further detail on a later slide as well that puts it into greater context as well, so you can see. So it's fundamentally around the mappings around thoroughfare and dependent thoroughfare, and dependent locality and double dependent locality. On the GES side, there is a further change in terms of a further transposition of secondary name and primary name. So that is effectively the substance of the change that is being made. If we can move on to the next slide, and I'll pause for questions and clarifications afterwards. So this change has no impact on the delivery of the inquiry service APIs. So there is no change to the APIs as they've been designed. So they return back the address elements as they're displayed in the rel payload as per the physical interface designed for CSS. So there is no change there. However, I think it's prudent to ensure if you are utilizing APIs, you're checking against the mapping around the address elements to ensure that in your own implementation the ordering is correct for some of those addresses. And we'll cover. We've got an example of this. I've pulled it out on the next slide. So this fix doesn't require any change to CSS. There's no regression testing or change at all there. Due to the design an operation of EES, we're making this change now than waiting until post go live, and in support of transition activities in terms of the bulk ingest of REL at the end of transition stage 2. So this work is pretty much carrying on and progressing now. We do have a very high degree of confidence that these changes will be made without impacting PS3 start or the go live date. So we don't believe there's any risk to that. There is a very small, very low probability that the start of transition stage 2 may need to be delayed. I don't believe this is the case, but it's something we've acknowledged. I think, so can you go on mute, please? Thanks. But we, as parties will note, we do have a fire break within transition stage 2. So we've got a longer TS2, which will allows us for some contingency for any delay should it be required without an impact on go live date. But just to reiterate, we do not believe this should, well, it certainly wouldn't impact go live date. And we don't believe it'll impact the start of TS2, but it's just calling out it's something that we're mindful of. Move to the next slide, please, Balraj. So what I've done on this slide is copy out some elements of, or a couple of tables from the CSS interface design specification, or the FID. There's and I think most parties will have access to this already and are very familiar with it. But I've put a link in as well into the slides. So what the issue is around is the mapping between effectively thoroughfare dependent thoroughfare and what comes out in the address payload. So effectively, if you look at the yellow cell here for thoroughfare, which maps on a meter point location address as line 5, that is actually coming in as street 1, but on a effectively typically a form a path type address, in terms of typically if a dependent thoroughfare was present, you would display that first. So effectively what's happening is, if there is a dependent thoroughfare, it's coming after the thoroughfare. So hence then where that address element is present, it should be displayed first, and that's the nature of the change fundamentally. So as mentioned, it's just where these additional address elements are present, it's just ensuring that they are presented in the correct order when concatenated on EES and displayed in the right field point on JES as well. So it's just making sure that that's clear for everyone. That is, in summary, the nature of the chapter. There is no change to the mappings or anything like that in terms of what comes through from the APIs or anything like that. In terms of next, if we move on to the next slide, please, Balraj. So, as I say, the changes are being worked on at the moment. Naturally, they will be available in terms of well, the minor change in terms of visibility of that in terms of the various portals and any documentation updates that may be required. We're waiting on confirmation of dates for this, and once that's available, will be communicated out. But as I said, there is no change in terms of the APIs at all. Also, I think it's just fair to note, I'm conscious that this has just come up, whether there is a need for a further session such as this to discuss. We're just putting out there. I'm hopeful that what we've talked through today provides sufficient detail, and with the following sort of the other any documentation changes and so on that may be required, that will cover it. But if there is a need for a further session, then that's something we can take away and look to schedule as well. So that was what I was going to call out on this. Anna, I see you've got your hand raised. So if you want to come in.
Hi, yes, just to point out on that previous screen, there's also a problem with primary and secondary ordering as well. It's not just the streets and localities, the primary and the secondary. So for example, the secondary is the flat 2. If on the right it says secondary name flat 2, London House. London House is the primary, so if it was in the order, it would say London House flat 2, so the ordering for those two is the wrong way round as well. It needs translating as well.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I mean, that's something we've understood for JES in terms of display. I believe from understanding that the address elements are added correctly. But yeah, that's at this point, the change is looking at making those changes as described.
But and I understand there is no consideration of changing the ordering of the rel message, the actual rel message itself that is arriving, that is being received by the parties.
There's no, there is no change to the CSS message. The detail is in the FID. I think it comes into this sort of interpretation issue, because we're conscious the FID does not call out a display order. And I think what has happened is detail has been effectively displayed as it comes in, as opposed to processing in it or displaying in any particular order. And this is sort of calling out the need to be conscious of that.
My concern is if anyone reads those manually, uses the rel messages to update addresses. And so if they will have to translate, and the LPI address and the DPA address are in different orders, so the translation would be, there would have to be a lot of consideration to if anyone needed to manually use these messages. Yes, okay, I agree that automated, everybody needs to map, but it's if someone looks at that message, they will see the address incorrectly, and they will have to get their head around what that address actually means. So I think that the rel message itself, the ordering of the rel message, does make parties who manually use the message very difficult. And I understand that some of the DNOs will be manually using the message. So
certainly there is no, I mean, at this point, in terms of certainly remapping or anything within the rel, that's isn't something that can be accommodated in terms of the impact of that as a change. So this is something I think that is most appropriately managed through documentation and communication, in terms of ensuring that parties understand what they're looking at. I think, and unless it's an easy change to a rel payload that can be made after go live in terms of an order in which they appear. But as far as I understand, the order in which the message is sent, you know, it wouldn't change the meaning of the nomenclature around the field. Okay. I think we can take this offline. I've emailed Chris Price, so we can discuss. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Anna. Mark, I think you were next. I don't know.
Yeah, can you hear me, Andrew?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah, I think what would be very useful for parties, I mean, I can understand what's going on, would be in some of the documentation, just for a very simple table that's rel address elements, MPL address elements electricity, MPL address elements gas, so that people can just look across and see, okay, it's there, because that way, you know, everybody knows what goes where, going in either direction.
Yep. So
obviously,
no, so this is in the FID at the moment. I put them next to each other. I certainly, there is further documentation. I think there's a rec category 3 rel guidance document to be produced and issued. So I think certainly incorporating something like that within there is something that I'd be keen to see, and I think would help address some of these points, and certainly manage that with,
you know, even in that table 4, even in table 411 you've got on the screen now on the left, if you just put a column down there that said rel field, so between gas format and description, if you just put a column in there that says rel field and then listed the rel fields they corresponded, I think that in itself would be would be just doing that would be useful.
Certainly. I mean, that's something we'll pick up with colleagues at DCC on that guidance. We'll make sure that there's elements of that to make sure there's clear understanding in terms of that enduring guidance document. If we can look to update this in the slide, I'll look to do that as well. But I suppose we've got the mapping with the colours here, which tries to do it simply, but I'm conscious that this is just for this session. We need to do something that explains things for broader use.
Yeah.
So we'll capture that as an action to take forward. Thanks, Mark.
And obviously, as has been mentioned, then you need to the other two fields that are impacted need to be highlighted as well, don't they?
Yeah, that's correct. Paul, go ahead. Thanks,
Andrew. Yeah, I understand the difficulty in changing the interface at this late stage. One of the suggestions I made, and I don't know whether it's made its way through to everyone or not, is there a possibility to add XML documentation tags into the interface? So you're not changing the interface itself, you're just adding additional XML descriptive elements, which would help either point someone to the documentation or clarify the use of the fields. That should be a less invasive change. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's a helpful one. I'll pick that up with colleagues at DCC and Landmark, and we can look to see if that can come through as that would undoubtedly need to be a post go live change. But yeah, it's something that, you know, for future we can certainly look at. That's helpful. Thanks, Paul. Any more questions or clarifications around this? So conscious it's late breaking. It's been quite a busy week on the rail front, because we wanted to make this sort of came through late on, and wanted to make sure we could work through an appropriate resolution for this. So I think we've taken a number of actions there around this in terms of further things to update. I've certainly got an action from the IRG to look at broader comms around this. So we'll be taking that forward as well with colleagues from RECO as well. So that was all I wanted to call out. Is there any thoughts? If we move on to the next slide, please, Balraj. As I say, we'll come back in terms of availability of when the portals themselves are updated, and if there are documentation changes, when that's available. Is there a need or a desire for any sort of further follow-up? I mean, we may have looked to, you know, I'll do a wrap up at the end, but is this something that parties think we need a further follow-up session on in a few weeks' time or something like that? Or does this provide sufficient now if we provide detail in terms of what's going to take forward following this?
Hello, Andrew. Just one point, picking up the point raised on the HTML tagging. At this point in time, we just need to emphasize there are no plans to change CSS before go live, and any suggested changes around HTML tagging, accepting that it is less invasive, would need to go through the CR process.
No, indeed it would, and I've suggested that would be, if that is to be considered, would be a post go live change.
Andrew, it's Chris.
Hi there, Chris.
Hi, I just wonder, because a few of the comments have been raised today, and there's a few actions I think you took, and well, maybe the XML will or won't get thrown into the pot now, or whether it could be reconsidered. And others may, and some of the suppliers and other people may have some comments. I do wonder whether it might make sense to do another session when, you know, if and when you've managed to update the mapping slide and everything, and just take everybody through it as a final.
Well, what we'll do as an action, I'll take forward. We've got a combined working group which we have CWG and DWG together and so on the 25th of April. What we'll do, we'll bring this back there as well. In terms of, we'll have we have a usual sort of rel update there at the standard DWG. So if we can take an action, Barraj, to add this issue to the agenda there, I'll look to get a further mapping table pulled together for that, and we can probably hopefully be in a position to confirm further dates around when the portals themselves will be updated in the test environment, just so there's some visibility in terms of what it will look like and so on. Would that help, Chris?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, because I'll catch up with Anna. We've spoken on this obviously, but I'll catch up with Anna and the DNOs afterwards. But it'd be useful just to close that out, whether there is something there or not that requires any reconsideration or any tweaks to the plan. So just
no, thank you. And I suppose as a broader action for API users more generally, I think seeing that this has come up, it would probably be prudent to check your implementations and where the data items that you're receiving via the APIs are then being displayed in your systems and so on, in terms of ensuring ordering is appropriate. So I think it will be worthwhile for all API users, that's suppliers, potentially PCWs as well, just to check that against what is in the slides as well, and what will and the FID and so on, to just make sure that and of course the existing API documentation as well. Okay, if there's nothing more on this, I think we'll go, if we can go back, Barraj, to the standard agenda, and I think I'm handing over to, is it Andrew from Exeter? We've got a lot of Andrews speaking today, so excuse us. Andrew, you there?
So Andrew, I'm conscious that someone has unmuted me, but I'm an Andrew Wallace and not from ExoServe. So I wonder whether the right Andrew has been given permission to speak.
Could be Andrew Steed, I think, who's taking us through this.
Mute. Ah.
You there? Oh, you're back on mute again.
Oh, hello.
There you go.
There we go. Apologies. Yeah, I'll stuck on mute then. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I guess my name's Andrew Steed. So I'm the business analyst for Corella. I've been working on the primarily on the GES online portal, but also more recently on some of the APIs. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview on the rel address search functionalities that we've implemented. So there are two main routes that a GES user can use to obtain rel address information. You see either manually via the gas inquiry service online portal, which is available to shippers, suppliers, and non-domestic consumers, which are ICC customers, I think, for under the UNC, or via the GES supply point switching API, which is available to suppliers, PCWs, and TPIs. So I'll be going through both routes in this presentation, just providing some screenshots and talking through the functionality. And I'm going to give you a very brief overview of some of the other changes that are also being made to the gas data inquiry service in order to turn it into the GES. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the online portal search functionality. So we'll quickly go through the new search functionality, some valid, invalid search combinations, going through some of the error messages, rel search field mapping, which is kind of what goes on in the background, and then a couple of the screens where we display the rel address, which is the results and details screen. So this is the first screen that you'll see. If you're familiar with DES currently, this will look very similar to the existing search or the meter point information search screen. we've based the rel search functionality on the same screen layout. So if you look on the yellow, or sorry, the light blue bar across the top, you'll see there's a brand new search function called rel search. And this is where you click in order to access the rel search functionality. And you'll see it's pretty much exactly the same layout as the existing search functionality, with the addition of the CSS registration ID search box and the UPRN search box. And there's also a checkbox at the bottom which you have to click in order to confirm that you are performing the search for the function of switching purposes. Without clicking that box, then the search button will be grayed out and unavailable. I think that's everything for that slide. Cheers. So a little bit of an overview of what happens in the search screen. Just to provide, with the top section, those top three searches, the meter point reference, confirmation reference, and CSS registration ID, those are all unique searches. So if you enter any details into those search boxes, then all the remaining boxes will just grey out, just to prevent you from performing invalid search combinations. And the next screen. Here, this is the below, sort of the second box below with the more address details and search functionality in it. This is a little bit more broad, so it enables combinations of searches, but we do still grey out certain combinations just to help prevent invalid searches. Next screen. So this is just sort of a little matrix showing the valid, or the minimum valid search combinations that are permitted within the rel search functionality. You can see, for example, if you enter a building number, if you go across, you can see that you have to, as a minimum, if you enter a building number, you also need to enter a postcode or an outcode, and similar with building name and so on. You can see that the full postcode, the MSN and UPRN, they've got a yes in the sort of the darker purple diagonal boxes, and that indicates that those can be searched on in isolation. Yeah, that gives you an overview of the search combinations. This is if you do enter an invalid search combination, then once you click on the search, you'll get an error message that pops up at the top of the screen. So this is again similar to the existing meter point search functionality, where you'll get a red error message which appears just above the search functionality, and that will advise you which fields you need to enter in order to perform a valid search. So, for example, in the screenshot shown, the person performing the search has entered a building number and a street, but in order to perform a valid search, they would also need to enter either a full postcode or an outcode or a town. So we've hopefully provided you with an error message which tells you which fields you need to enter. If the search is valid but returns no results, so for example in the screenshot there's 11111 isn't a real meter point reference number, then you'll just receive an error message just stating that there's no records found and you'll need to modify your search criteria. So this is the rel search sort of field mapping. So this is what happens in the background when you enter some data into the search criteria boxes and perform a search. So what happens is, if you enter, for example, a value in the building number field, the search will be performed against our MPL address database, and it will search the building number data field in there, and it will also search against the rel address fields database, and it will look for primary name and secondary name, and should a match be found in either of those fields, we will return the results. And this just shows all the mapping that happens for all of the fields that you enter. And I guess with meter point reference number and the unique searches, they can be searched for in isolation, and we'll just look for that specific data item. Cool. So if the search that you've entered is broad and it returns multiple results. So for example, if you just enter a postcode, so in the screenshot attached, the person performing the search has just entered the the postcode ZZ1 1ZZ, and we've returned 3 addresses, and you can see that will display to the user the MPL address, and then directly below it will display the rel addresses or any rel addresses that are associated with that meter point, with that MPL address. And these will be displayed in order of logical status. So any approved rel addresses will be at the top, and then provisional, alternative, historic, and then NA. And if no rel addresses are found, then there'll be a message just stating no rel address found. So these are, I guess, currently these are in the order of sort of the rel address is sort of concatenated into the order of primary name, secondary name, street 1, street 2, locality 1. I can't see the bottom ones there. I can see it's locality 2 and then town. But as we mentioned earlier, this is going to be changed slightly, but it'll look exactly the same on the screen. There's going to be no, well, the ordering will be changed slightly, but there'll be no sort of actual user interface changes taking place. I'll come on to that in a little bit. Next screen, sorry. So this is the rel search details screen. So if the search that you've performed brings back a single result, so you've entered a specific search, it gets one result, you'll get onto this screen. Or if you click on the relevant MPL address, I think it's on the meter point reference number in the previous screen, in the search, in the previous screen that we were on, the results screen, then you'll be taken to this search detail screen, and this detail screen gives you the full rel address payload below the MPL address, so you can see the individual data items and their title. And this one will be changing slightly, but I'll come on to that again in a moment. So just a quick overview. This is kind of the journey of a search. You'll enter your details in the search field in the search screen, perform the search. As long as it's a valid search, you'll either get taken to the result screen if the search brings back multiple results. You can then from there click on the MPRN of the desired address that you're looking for, and it will take you to the search details screen. Also, if you perform a search which brings back a single meter point record, you'll be taken directly to that rel search details screen. So a quick overview of the changes that we're going to make in the system, as mentioned. So currently the rel address displayed on the results screen is in the order primary name, secondary name, street 1, street 2, locality 1, locality 2, and then town. We're going to update that in order to display it secondary name, primary name, so street 2, street 1, locality 2, locality 1, and then town, and that's just to ensure that they are displayed in the correct logical order, or we are displaying the majority of the as many addresses as we can in the correct logical order. Onto the details screen. So this one's changing slightly in that we're going to be moving around some of the actual heading boxes. So in the rel address payload below the MPL address, you can see currently we display it in primary name, then secondary name, and in the screenshot in the bottom right, you can see that we're just going to amend those to the order that I've previously mentioned. So we're switching around the secondary name and primary name and the streets and locality fields. Cool. Just a quick overview of some of the other changes that are taking place in the existing DES online portal. So I guess one of the key ones is that the data refresh rate. Currently, data in DES is 24 hours old. We refresh it every night, and then so the next day there's some new information there. In the new JES world, we're going to be updating data close to real time, so it'll be a maximum of 15 minutes for any data that we receive from CSS. and a maximum of 2 hours for UK linked data. And that is a maximum, so majority of the time it'll be much quicker than that, pretty much real time. A couple more to go through on there, sorry. We're in the actual the meter point information search screen. We're also adding in the search field CSS registration ID, so you'll be able to perform meter point information searches via a CSS registration ID if you have it. We're also adding into the details screen, and you can see this in the screenshot on the right. There's an additional data item for RMP status. And also you can see the inclusion of the CSS switching data tab. So this is the primary tab that you'll come to if you're looking for your CSS registration data, and it will display the current registration details as provided by CSS and the incoming registration details as provided by CSS. So this will be visible in the portfolio view to any to the existing I guess shippers and suppliers. It'll also be visible in community view for any incoming shipper or supplier, so they can see their incoming registration details. And as mentioned previously, we're also implementing this new rel search functionality. Next slide, cheers. So this is moving on to the supply point switching API. So a quick overview of the process which you can go through in order to find the relevant rel address via API. That involves a supply point switching address search and a supply point switching gas data search. Next, cheers. So a little bit of an overview of the process in which you can follow. There's two APIs here. So the first one is the address search, and this is sort of similar to the online portal search functionality. It requires just a postcode as a mandatory data item, and you can also enter a house number or name. So if you haven't got a unique number, you don't know exactly which address you're searching for, you could perform sort of a more broad search looking for a number of results in order to track down the unique meter point or the unique address that you're looking for. Once you've got that information, you've identified your rel address that you're looking for, you can use the UPRN or the address ID provided in that payload in order to perform a more unique, detailed gas data search. And then so for that API, you need the MPRN, the UPRN, or the address ID or postcode, along with enough address details in order to make it a unique search. Next slide.
Hello, Andrew. We've got a question come through.
Yes,
will users have a separate login for their shipper and supplier role?
For this, I believe they will. Yes. This will be accessed via the secondary API portal, I believe. So you have to have a unique login for shipper and supplier, I think. So this is the address search API input. So you can see it's a get API and the routes attached, and you can see that the postcode is the only mandatory data item, and the search request is a URL encoded query string, such as you would see in the internet browser address bar.
Hello, Andrew. Just on that question, that was for the web portal?
Oh, for the web portal?
Yeah.
Yes, I thought so. Oh, sorry, of course. So yeah, for the web portal, I think you will still have separate. Oh no, wait a second. I think you will now. I think actually you will have a single log on for a shipper and a supplier if you have an associated accounts, and I think they're going to implement a drop down menu, so you can switch between the two once you've logged in. I think as long as they are both associated with the same email address. Is that right? I might have to get this clarified.
Andy, do you want me to pick up on that one?
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. as part of the sort of move to cloud activities that we are implementing, and apologies, I can't remember the exact date as to when we're doing that, but it is imminent. We will be changing how users will log on to the gas inquiry service. So whereas at the moment it's based on a username, it will be moving to your corporate email address, and that will then enable you to have multiple user accounts associated to a single log on. So if you do have a supplier account and a shipper account, technically they will be merged into that one corporate email log on.
Cheers, Mike. Does that answer the question? Yep.
Yeah, I'll let you know if there's any additional responses. Yeah,
Okay,
that's answered the question.
Brilliant. Cheers, Mike. Okay, next slide. So this is an example response from a successful address search API query. You can see that we just provide a list of addresses which have matched your input criteria, and you'll see that if the address ID field is populated, you'll know that that is an MPL address, and if you can see the UPRN is populated, then you'll know that it's a rel address. And then you can take, I guess you can take those values and then perform the switch data API request. Sorry, next slide.
Hello, Andrew. Just a follow-on question.
Yeah.
Someone has responded on the chat. Though possibly we'll need clarification about the user login via email with multiple users under one email address.
Yeah. What's clarifications needed? Sorry.
So clarification about the user logon via email with multiple users under one email address. What was the question?
So I think on that one that there has been communication that has recently gone out to all impacted parties on that one. What we can do is if you just share with us who's asking that question, and we can get in contact with them and provide them with the necessary details.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Cool. Cheers, Mike. So this is the address search. I guess if you enter an invalid search, or there's no, or yeah, it will perform some validations. Any error message will be returned as the following string, just highlighting the error codes, and we'll come on to some of the error codes in a couple of slides' time. So this is the supply point switching, the gas data search. Again, it's a get query, and you can see the input string, and here, yeah, you must enter an address ID or UPRN or enough of an address in order to result in a single rel address result. Next slide. You should
Hello,
see.
Andrew.
Yeah.
We have two hands raised. One from Pankaj.
Okay, Pankaj.
If you can go back to the previous slides where you showed that the address response. Yeah, before this. Yeah. So I actually didn't get this. So you mentioned something. If you get address ID, then it's a MPL, and if it's a rel UPR, and it's a rel address, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So on the right hand side, what is that you're trying to highlight? Match found in MPL and REL records. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that box is not quite in the right place. It's moved slightly. It should be pointing to the UPRN. So it should, rather than the PO box number, that should be pointing to the UPRN.
UPRN. Okay.
So it's highlighting that if you have a UPRN in the payload, you know that is a rel address. Whereas if the UPRN is blank, you'll know it's just an MPL address.
But what I read in the document was that if every address that will be coming from the response, right, it will be having a UPRN, right? So where we are not able to match the MPL with the with the rel address, then you create a local rel address, right? Local UPRN number.
Yeah.
So
I believe
the
that's
UPRN may be blank. Yeah.
I believe that's correct. Is that, Mike, are you able to confirm that? I think that everything will have a
that is
UPRN.
correct, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so UPRN will never be blank then, right? We'll always have it. We'll always have a UPRN number.
So I think, Pankaj, if the address that we're returning is the MPL, it won't have the UPRN associated to it if it doesn't have a rel associated with it as well. So if it's just purely the MPL address, then you would just get the address ID element and the UPRN would be blank in that scenario. But if it is picking up an associated rel address, then you will receive the UPRN as well that is linked to that rel.
Okay. Okay, fine then. Yeah, thank you.
And we also have a hand raised by Mark.
Hi, can you go back down? I think it's 2 slides where you had the list. Next, no, back one, I think. No, it was the one where you said you filled these things in. Keep going. Oh yeah. If you go back one. That's the one. If you're going to reissue these slides for a wider audience, the statement at the bottom says only one of the data items in bold is required. There's no bold text on that page, so you might want to correct the slides if these are being uploaded for people to view afterwards.
Yeah. So I have in my slide deck they are in bold. So I'm not quite sure why they're not showing as bold in the presentation.
That might be.
But yeah, we'll make sure.
Yeah, let me check that because all I've done is PDF them. So
Yeah, you might have
let me have
done some of the formatting.
And likewise with the movement of that, it's
the arrow.
Yeah, let me have a look and I'll check and we'll look to fix that.
Yeah, so just to clarify in here, the items in bold is the address ID, the UPRN, the meter point reference number, and postcode. And anything that's in the brackets at the end of that last sentence are the ones that are in bold and are the mandatory data items. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
We have a hand raised by Pascal.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, hi. In your example of an address returned for a supply point address, if there is only an MPL matching as the address ID is filled in and no UPRN, do you fill in the details of address after that? So if you go back to your example where you show address search API response for supply point address. Hello? Not this one.
I think the previous response, yeah, a couple of slides before. Next one up.
One more.
That's one.
That one. So if you give me an address ID but no UPRN, are you going to fill in the details of address with the MPL data, or they stay blank? That makes sense. Or
Yeah, so I mean, if we're populating the address ID, you will receive all of the address data that will be associated to that meter point location.
even so, you don't have an UPRN.
Yeah,
What I'm trying to figure out is, do I get data if I just have an address ID and not?
Yes, you do. You do. So fundamentally, the data that we're returning will be a combination of the MPL and the rel addresses. So you will get multiple addresses being returned.
Okay.
Is it worth putting another example in there that shows that way round? Because all the examples you've got there don't, do they?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have some updated examples. That's not a problem to cover those different scenarios.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
So I think where were we? I think we were on the switching payload. A couple of slides up. One more slide. So yeah, that one. Next slide down. Next one. Other way, sorry. There we go. This is an example of the gas data API response. So in here you can see there's you get a much more detailed list of data. You get some meter point information, and you can see on the right hand side towards the bottom you get the full rel address payload as well associated. Again, there's a number of error codes, so this is an example of what you receive if your search is not valid and you get an error message in return. Next slide. So this is just an example of some of the error codes. So, for example, a twin stream meter point or a shared meter point will respond with an error. Same with extinct meter points, or if the meter point number is not found, again you'll receive an error. And this is just displaying some of the error messages that you'll receive. And some useful links. So there's the existing data inquiry service overview and user guide. I believe we're working currently on an updated user guide, which will be published shortly. There's some DES business requirement document for the changes being made, some API documentation, and some technical specifications as well. I think that's the end. Cheers. Any more questions?
Yeah, we have a hand raised by Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, you just gone back exactly the right one. Just an interesting one. If you're looking for the switching data, how on earth would you have more than one of the same MPRN in the data set? Surely that's a fault on the system, not a fault on the call.
Which one are you specifically referring to? Sorry.
E008. MPRN has more than one matching record. Surely that implies that you've got the MPRN twice as a data set, which is, I would say, is an error at that end, not at the supplier's end who's doing the request.
I think the challenge on that one, Mark, is that from an API point of view, when you run the gas data search, it will only bring back the data if it is associated to a single MPRN. So if you were searching on address information within that gas data search and it identified that there were multiple MPRNs that matched your input criteria, it will send back that error code for you, because what it's trying to do is prevent anyone from, extracting multiple records out of the system at the same time. And that one will only return a single MPRN record. So in essence, what you would need to do is, if you did receive that error, the recommendation would be you put that the address data into the address search, and then narrow your search down through that way and get one of the unique identifiers, such as the address ID or the UPRN, to then query the gas data search, and that will bring back that single record associated to that address.
Yeah, but I'm reading the description which says requested meter point reference has more than one record. That implies I'm searching based on MPRN.
Yeah, let's
never get
one away and just check the error description on that one.
I think it's a slightly misleading error description, but we'll go away and check that one. Yeah.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a valid. It isn't clear, is it? We'll go and check that.
Thank you. Any further questions for Xserve on the JES implementation at all? Notice a couple of actions there. In the background, I've re-PDF the slides. I think I had to manually, it wouldn't do the bold. So I think I've fixed it now though. So we'll get those reissued with that, but I'm conscious there was another update to do on it. An example of I think it was the API address search API response. So I don't know how long that will take to come through, but when that comes, we'll reissue that as well. Okay, anything more? Neil, you've got your hand raised, I see.
Yeah, it's just a question on where it applies to EES and JES. Basically, will there be training offered to agents? Obviously, the people on this call don't regularly use the service as much as our frontline agents would. We need So I think they'll need some sort of updates and training.
Andrew, did you want me to pick up on that one?
Do you want to pick on that? Yeah,
Yeah.
Times as a reco activity, really, won't it? So yeah, if you want to pick that up, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. So so Andrew Wallace, Retco. So I think what we're looking to do today is to provide that kind of update to parties on what the new arrangements look like. Hopefully, what you've kind of picked up from the presentation so far is that there is also documentation that's being provided to parties on changes to the API and to the portal. We don't have any training arrangements kind of planned at the moment, but I'm certainly kind of looking to get a steer from calls and discussions like this as to what the potential benefit would be of that, to see kind of what and if we can provide something. I think both in advance of CSS go live, but also whether that's an enduring requirement to have something like an online kind of tutorial or whatever it looks like on the portal, the rec portal for people to access. So useful to get a steer from parties, having, I guess, digested today and the materials that have been presented to parties around user guides and what have you, post meeting.
I think something's definitely required here.
Thanks, Neil. Is that are there any other views on this as well? I'm conscious that's one supplier view which is helpful, but is that something that others would welcome as well?
Andrew, we've had something on the chat saying training is a really good suggestion.
I think it's worth with the gas switch to the API. We do provide a developer portal, which is kind of a sandbox where you can have a play around with some of these APIs and test them out.
I'm less worried about that.
Yeah, fair enough. That is something that is available. The online portal, as I say, it'll be very similar to the existing search. So if you're finding results using the existing search functionality, then it'll be a similar search in the rel search functionality. But yeah.
Yeah, further support in the chat for it too. We've got a few hands up. We've got June.
Yeah, it was just to support that suggestion. We definitely appreciate some training on these systems.
Thanks, June. Kerry, is there a comment there? And Lisa, I think. Oh, they're questions. I think. Let's see. So we've got one. Excerpt of online training material is really good on the website. Something like this would be really helpful. And Kerry, yeah, would also welcome training. Okay, I think. Oh, Neil, you've come back again. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, have you done with my first thing about training? If you have,
yeah.
In the EES overview yesterday, we talked about obligation to update the MPL address in life, in the life of the meter. In that situation, if we, for example, got a house split up into flats and meters being created, or a property being developed within another property, we would, as a supplier, we would update the MPL address. What would happen to the rel address in that situation? Because this isn't a switch. As an agent, I don't think I should be looking at the rel address. Does that mean CSS would see that the MPL address has been updated, and would then administer a change to the necessary changes to the rel address?
So my understanding would be, and I'll maybe defer, I don't know if Richard or Adam is on the line here. If you, in terms of process, I think there's an action coming on training, so I'll wrap that up first and then come back to the MPL update piece. So just going back on the training point, I think there's a certainly, Andrew, it seems like there's a strong steer for looking to progress some element of training. If we can maybe perhaps pick that up offline and some reference back to the Exoserve material. So if we can
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, if we can pick that up offline and look to progress that, I think that'll be really good. So Barash, if you can make a note of that. In terms of the MPL update, my understanding is if you send whatever the appropriate flow, if we're looking at this, I'm thinking this from an electricity perspective, I'm closer to that little bit of aspect, I would surmise, and it will presumably be exactly the same on the gas side, is you would have an instance where you would send a request through to the DNO to do an address update through existing process outside of CSS. If that MPL address is then updated appropriately, or then that will be synced back to CSS and a rel will be updated accordingly. But presumably, if we're looking at a development here, we're looking at new registrations anyway, in which case the MPL will be created with the new meters going in. And then once the initial registration has progressed and upon first registration, the role will be created.
Okay, I think I picked a bad example then, but we need an example where the MPL is being updated. So that would go in electricity via the DNO, and then
that's correct. Anything to do with the MPL would go via existing process, and if that then may trigger a rel update accordingly. I think
as a supplier, we're not responsible for. It would be something the DNO sorts out with CSS.
Hi, Andrew. It's Adam Lydiard here from DCC. There is an obligation, isn't there, to make sure that all the addresses are correct. So if a supplier were to identify an incorrect address for an MPL, they can raise a ServiceNow ticket, and that will go into CSS, or indeed they can identify that and send through the existing process a request into the DNO to change it. And then once, as you've said, Andrew, once the change is affected in by the DNO, that will then get messaged. An API message will be sent to CSS, correct that address within the CSS, and then that is synced back out to the inquiry services.
Yeah, assuming a rel update then takes place on the basis of that MPL update, wouldn't it, Adam, I think?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So there was checks to make, obviously, to make sure it can still be matched to OSABP and so on and so forth. All that is done within the CSS and then synced back to the inquiry services.
And the same for gas, I presume?
Yes. If there, absolutely. If there is a change identified in the MPL, advise Exoserve, the change will be made and impacted and flow through. The only issue, as Andrew said about if it were, and I know you mentioned it might have been a bad example to choose, but when you have a premises and it is split into flats, what might happen is the UPRN for the initial premises might stay as the shell of the property, and each of those individual flats will then be assigned their own UPRM. Those will be created on registration. They will flow into the CSS within the meters of newly created meters. It may take a little while for those newly created addresses to appear in OSABP, because it might take 6 weeks for the new version of OSABP to come through. So it might initially be an unmatched address, and as soon as that meter appears in OSABP, each what they call an epoch update, that would be it would be then checked against that epoch. Once it's found, it will then be a matched address that will and again a sync message flowing back into the inquiry services to recognise the fact that it can now be matched to OSABP.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Adam. Does that help? And I think it's linking back to the again where there are obligations placed in the rec address management schedule, which naturally link back across rec parties to both the MPL accuracy and rel accuracy as well. Okay, anything more? Pangaj, I think you've got your hand raised as well. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So I guess what the person from DCC, sorry, I forgot the name, but he mentioned, right, if the supplier continues to follow the existing process of updating the MPL address, and then it's getting updated by an API into the CSS to correct the rel address, does the supplier need to still raise a service ticket to manually change the rel address, or that's completely different use case?
From my perspective, I think that would be a different use case, but I will defer to DCC on that.
Hello again. If the ServiceNow ticket was raised as well as informing the DNO, it would be sort of like duplication of effort. As long as one of those is done, and I'd suggest you would stick to the same approach as done now. So inform the DNO, and they would amend the ticket, amend the address, beg your pardon. That will then be messaged through into CSS. That would seem the most sensible thing to do.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Is there an action here just to confirm that the process? I don't know, Adam, if this is something potentially that's covered in the previous version of the lifecycle document, but certainly something to incorporate in the update that's coming around sort of processes around MPL updates and how these feed through to the rel.
The previous the rel lifecycle document as it exists at the moment states that you've got there are two routes to change the MPL address within CSS, and thereby change the rel address effectively, whether it be matched or unmatched, and they are a ServiceNow ticket from a supplier or a message coming in from the DNO. It's those are the two options. It's not really for DCC to say you should follow one or the other. It's probably best to make sure that all the parties are aware there are two options, and if they wish to do the existing, is it a D381 or something like that? I can't remember exactly. Whatever the ticket is raised by the supplier into the DNO, if they wish to follow that, they can. And if they did wish to actually contact the CSS directly, there is that option as well.
So I think that's around updating am I clear? That's updating the rel. So two ways of updating the rel, either a request, or was that in reference specifically to an MPL? Because the MPL is mastered by the network operator.
Absolutely. Beg your pardon. Yeah, you're correct. So that is the rel that I'm on about. And yes, if you wish to update the MPL, it should go through the DNO. Yes, because they own inverted commas of that MPL.
So in terms of an MPL update, maybe we just take it away and make sure we've got absolute clarity here. You wouldn't raise a ServiceNow ticket to update an MPL.
Beg your pardon, not for an MPL. No, I missed that nuance. Yeah, not for the MPL. The rel is mastered in the CSS, not the MPL.
That's correct. No, I just wanted to make sure we're clear on that. So yeah, if any MPL changes, regardless of regardless if you'll go through existing messaging flows to either would be either ERDS or GRDS post go live, and then rel updates go through ServiceNow ticket to CSS and the switching operator.
Yes, I agree.
I think I've covered that right. Mark and Anna, I see you've got hand raised. Mark, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just the thing on updating the rel, and obviously it sounds like if we update the MPL, that'll feed through, and then that may trigger a rel update. In terms of raising a service ticket to do it that route, if we chose to, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, we are only allowed to view the rel if we are doing a switch activity. Therefore, if it's a BAU life cycle address update, we're not allowed to view the rel. So how do we know it needs changing? We can't do that. It's not an option.
I'm assuming this is on the basis of it would be linked, that aspect of the process would come through, I think it's at the time of registration if it's wrong. But again, that's a really good point, Mark.
But if it is, I think Mark's getting at the point is it actually for the purposes of switching? Is that where you're coming from, Mark?
Yeah, my understanding on the new rules on
the use of the rel.
Yes, yeah, the use of the rel. We have to say that we are viewing the rel on ES. I keep trying to call it echoes, or still call it echoes. We can only tick the box if it is for the purpose of doing a switch. Now, if you take that literally, if we've had a customer for 6 months and the address needs updating, we are not allowed to go and look at the rel to determine if it needs updating, because we're not allowed to under that that rule that says condition. We're not doing a switch. Yes. So
I understand.
That's the point I'm making.
It could be interpreted in a wider, it could be, I hasten to add, that for future, in order to facilitate any possible future switch, need to have the address correct. And it could be viewed in that light to facilitate future possible switches.
Then that needs to be made very clear in the ESDS GS documentation and in the way they word it on the screen, which says only for switching. And obviously, you know, you talk to lawyers and they will take it. Typically, they will take it in the narrow definition. They won't try and broaden it. If it is meant to be broader, I think that needs to be documented in the address management process within the REC, and obviously the relevant user agreements for actually using the inquiry services.
So yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that's a really good point. Let's take that away. I suppose there's a couple of things here potentially. One, looking at where this fits into the rel life, potentially for the rel life cycle doc, because I think there'll undoubtedly need to be coverage around the sort of usage and license, and there is in there, but at a high level. Whether there's anything to look at in terms of the drafting around the address management schedule and how that interplays with obligations, because again, I don't know if that does present a because you've got obligations in terms of one thing in terms of use of rel. The whole point around the rel is that it's there to support switching and reliable. The rel has got to be correct, so therefore the obligation to keep it up to date. Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give an opinion because I can't. But you would need, yeah, I think maybe we just need to have a quick review of potentially some of the drafting just to make sure. But I think that's a helpful point in terms of potentially post switch updates to the rel or checks on accuracy as to whether there needs to be some further clarity provided in either in I think sort of guidance documentation that's issued, and possibly access agreements as well. But let's take that away. Thanks, Mark. Anna, you were next. You had a point.
Yes, just going back to Adam saying there's two routes in. One is via the manual entry of the address in CSS, and one via DNOs. Currently, I don't believe that all DNOs would process the rel, so the MPL address in MPRS would not necessarily be updated for every rel. So if you say you can go both options, I don't believe that doing it the manual entry route into CSS would necessarily update the MPR. It wouldn't update the MPRS address.
Sorry, as I mentioned, I made a mistake of the difference between a rel and MPL. I thought it was a rel. So updating the rel can be done those routes, not the MPL.
Yes, yeah. But if the MPL is then updated, via MPRS, it goes off and tries to match the rel, which then generates a rel, which then gets sent to EES. So the rel would then be connected to the MPL.
That's correct. It would be aligned to it, yeah.
Yeah, so that way round. So there as has been alluded to before, there needs to be an end-to-end process of do you just update the manually entered data rel, or do you do both? And in what situations? There are situations when the MPL and the rel aren't the same address.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing is, of course, that there needs to be a clue as to not everybody has access to the address-based premium. So not everybody can know what address would match to a rel. So the connection of understanding how the address, so someone can put an address in, if there's if there's a spelling mistake or there's a specific data item that's required that's not there, that wouldn't necessarily match to a rel. So there needs to be an idea of what an address needs to look like. Would suppliers know what that address should be? I'm guessing through their customers, that they would know what the address is. So to send it to MPRS would send the correct address, but this can't always be guaranteed, can it? The mapping of the MPL to the rel.
No, but the DNO has the say on what address. If I send an address update to the DNO, they perform all their own validation before they accept or reject that address update. So I would guess that would sit with the DNOs to make sure that they don't put in an address that's going to go backwards, I guess.
Yeah,
yes.
The obligation on the MPL quality still resides with the network operator regardless.
Yes, and the problem is, of course, that because not everybody has access to address-based premium, so they wouldn't be able to look up the address that would be a match to understand exactly what fields to put to make sure all the data is available to make the match. But yes, okay. So
it sounds like there's the potential for, I think, some further clarity around, I suppose, end-to-end address management in, post go live with the combination of MPL and rel. And I think that's something we will need to, I think, look at. I don't know where that best sits, whether that sits as part of probably the rec or with DCC is in terms of the role DCC has in terms of looking at address quality and overseeing the rel as well. So I think if we can look to maybe perhaps take that offline in terms of what next steps would be, but I think if we can take an action to look at that and take that away, I think that might be the best thing to do here.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Where next? Pankaj, did you have a question, or was that a legacy hand?
No, it's just to add on to that point, right? So currently what we follow is that in case the customer contacts us and says that I want to update the address because it's incorrect, our agents do the postal address finder check, right? Whether the address which customer is suggesting to change to, is it available in the postal address finder or not? And depending on that, then they send a flow to change the address to the DNO, right? Now they have a reference point here to check whether the address is there in MPL in that postal address finder or not. Now, if we compare the similar thing to do with the REL, if the agent need to know that which is the correct address, what is the reference point that they should use to verify that, right? Whether the change the customer is suggesting, I guess the customer will not have the view of that, but whether the supplier should be making a change to correct the rel address, what is the reference point they should be using to send that request to change the rel address? So that also needs a clarity. Yeah.
So it is whether I think the view on whether a rel should be updated is something that from my perspective and understanding, and I'll defer back to DCC as custodians of the rel, is whether the supplier or the consumer, or primarily whether the consumer feels that the rel address themselves or what have you, it could be improved. So they, if they suggest, actually I live here, it's, if you want to find me, use this address. It's and so on. So I think it's there for a discussion between supplier and consumer, and then on the basis of that, an update is progressed.
If I may say, Andrew, as well, I mean, that's the purpose of a manually entered address as well. If the consumer insists that their address is whatever, and that doesn't conform to a PAF address, and obviously OSABP references PAF as well, if they're insisting that it would be effectively couldn't be matched in PAF and therefore in OSABP, it could still be put through as a manually entered address, and that would appear as one of the addresses in the array for the rel addresses. It would be of type ME as opposed to of type match or MPL. So you could still have that come up in a search once you've entered it, once it's in the system, and synchronize back to the inquiry services. You could still have that being displayed as a valid address, one of the addresses in the array of the rel, even though it's not recognised in PAF, for example. Does that make sense?
Adam, sorry, quick question.
Yes.
So if the DNO entered if the wrong address went through as the MPL address, an address,
the wrong
as you
address,
say, that as you say, the address doesn't match because the customer is insistent that's his address.
Yeah.
So then that gets sent off to CSS. The rel message comes back and now says MPL address rather than matching DPA or LP address.
There would be an additional address in that rel array. There would be an address of type ME for manually entered address, so that the address that the customer insists that they're referred to by would be the within the rel address that is sent back from CSS to the inquiry services. Now there would be, I believe, in the CSS operations a query if you had a match initially for their address, and this manually entered address was going to break that match. There would be a query as to really whether that should be done or not. But if it is like, well, the customer is insisting that this is their address, then that address can be changed to an address of type ME. And then, of course, when a switch request came in from that customer, that is the address that they would be quoting. And then that is the one that you can inquire against in the inquiry services, and it will come up. So if they insist that their house is called Rose Cottage, for example, but that is not recognised on OSABP, Rose Cottage, Acacia Avenue or whatever, when you actually put that into the inquiry screen, that address would be there because it would be there of the type manually entered address.
And that's only via manually entering in CSS. That's not via the MPL route. So if the MPL, so if the DNO, that route, if for example the supplier did not do the manual entry but only updated via the DNO and the MPL address was updated, that then didn't match, would the rel then come back with the MPL address plus the DPA, the original DPA and LPI addresses as well? So would it do it as an MPL address that way around as well?
I would have to check on that. I believe so, and the reason I believe so is if it was originally matched, you see, it's matched to the UPRN. But my concern is what we'll be doing there is breaking a matched address and putting it to one that isn't matched, which would break that UPRN effectively. So that's a good question. It's something I'd like to defer and make sure I give the right answer to.
Great, because if obviously it does then break the rel and then the rel, it just comes back with the MPL address, then EES would then be updated with just the MPL address.
Yeah, it would still. If it was put in as type MPL, that would happen, but it's the breaking of the UPRN I just want to query, because I believe my understanding of what would happen in the CSS is that would be an inquiry back to say, do you really want to break this UPRN? We've got it down as one Acacia Avenue. You're saying it's Rose Cottage Acacia Avenue. That's not recognised within OSABP. It will break the UPRN and basically it said that yes, the customer's insisting upon that, then that would I believe go through, and you break that UPON, unfortunately. But
yeah, but then this goes back to Andrew's taking it away to work out the process, the full process.
Yes, yeah.
So end-to-end process. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to have to probably look to wrap some of this up and pick some of this up offline, so I want to make sure we get the reco stuff covered. Rob, you've had your hand raised for a while. Did you want to come in?
I was just going to quickly add to Mark's point, really, that if there's an obligation on us as the current supplier to keep the rail data up to date, then that's not something we're necessarily going to be looking for. So if the rail address is getting updated because of ordnance survey updates, we're not going to be able to check that they're right or wrong, or if they need to be amended, because we're not going to get notified, or we're not going to see it. I think that's just another thing to take away.
Yeah, no, we'll pick this up and take away, but I think it's in relation to, I need to check the exact wording in the rec. I think it's more around where you become aware of. I believe it's something along those lines. So okay. I don't think it's I think parties will need to check the exact wording, but my recollection is it's where you become aware of. It's around that line, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, if there's nothing more, and is that a legacy hand? Just to check, or a new one? No, it's gone. Okay, thanks.
Legacy.
Hello, Andrew. There's two more questions that's raised in the chat. If we have time. So the first one is about the training. At the moment, is it only going to be available to suppliers?
So I think we've got a broader point around training and what that looks like, which Andrew and I will pick up as an action from this. But I think my view is, if we're looking at training around rail use, it's got to support all potential users of the rail. So it would have to encompass all potential parties who can have access, if that's part of the question.
Okay.
Was there another one?
Yep. And then lastly, if the address change completed via DNO and is accepted, DNOs then update CSS. Is there a likelihood for a rejection at this point?
If the MPL has been updated, that will be synced to CSS. CSS will accept the MPL because it's been mastered by the network operator. That will trigger the any potential change to the rel. I think there's a broader question around, as we've said, around documenting an end-to-end process around address updates. So I think that would probably get wrapped up as part of that.
No further questions.
Thanks, Barry. That's great. And I think what I'm taking from this is there does need to be some further clarity around the end-to-end process around address management. So we'll look to drive some further work on that and bring that back to data working group. Okay, Andrew, I think I'm handing over to you now, I believe. We've got about...
It's Prashant first.
Is it Prashant first?
Yeah.
And then so we've got half an hour left on the agenda. I don't think we've had any other AOBs. We've had a really good discussion today. So if you can keep to half an hour, that'd be great. But let's see how we go.
Thanks, Andrew. Can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
Great. So good morning, everyone. My name is Prashant Sagar. I'm a part of the code manager, and I've been leading some of our preparations for CSS from an operational perspective. Today, I'd like to take you through the following agenda items up on screen around how to gain access, a bit about the regulatory framework, a couple of points to make around the transition and where we are with that at this stage, and I will provide a short sort of overview of the process that we will operate for qualification and maintenance, and then I'll hand over to Andrew Wallace to talk you through the opportunity to test and how the service test will work where you have a query. So if we start off with the next slide around gaining access to GES and EES, I guess the first concept is around qualification, and qualification is a process that is currently live within the REC, and that will is a concept that is currently live in the REC and will extend to GES and EES. We, as a code manager, manage the qualification process, and we will do it in a slightly different way for EES and GES, and as opposed to sort of having a sort of longer market entry process, we will have the concept of an access agreement, which needs to be signed if you are a non-REC party. If you are a REC party, then you won't need to sign an access agreement. However, you will accede the provisions of your accession will contain the similar obligations as in an access agreement. So I guess the first point to make is the concept of qualification still applies. If you are a REC party, you don't need an access agreement. If you are a non-REC party, then you will need an access agreement, and that access agreement will set out whether or not what you're actually using from the EES and GES, what sort of reports you have accessible, etc. If you already have a contract with DES, then you will be deemed to be qualified. So we as a code manager will recognize that qualification, and we won't need you to complete any sort of qualification activities. We will send you an access agreement based on the type of access you have, and based on the type of customer you are and the type of service you receive. And we would need you to sign that access agreement for it to before CSS go live. So it would be effective on CSS go live. Existing ES users won't need a new access agreement, so we will carry that over. And I guess the point to make is that once you are qualified, there will be some assurance checks in place, such as the annual statement and the information security data protection assessment. So that's a brief overview of how to get access. Is if you want to get access, you need an access agreement. If you're a non-REC party, if you're a REC party, then you will have access. You would just need to get in touch with the code manager around getting the right, if you need some additional reports or anything else. We'll move on to the next slide, please.
Hello, we have a question raised through the chat. Will non-domestic users be notified that they are moving under the REC?
Yes, so we as part of our communications, we will send out communications to all of those parties who are qualified and how their access agreements will change over the next few weeks, and that the access agreements that we do send out will sort of set out what the changes are and what they need to do to complete the access agreement and what it means for them. That's okay. So moving on to the regulatory framework. The regulatory framework is composed of the data access schedule, the data access matrix, and the service definitions. Those are the three core components of the REC that affect access to EES and GES services. The data access schedule says, who can access, who is entitled to access what, and what you can use the data for. The data items that each user can access is set out in the data access matrix, and the service definition sets out what ExoServe and CNC are supposed to do as part of providing the service. So this includes service definition, this includes SLAs and their obligations in that respect. That, in a nutshell, is the overall framework of how it works. There is the obviously the access agreements, which is your agreement with RECCO, and that sort of is part of it's not necessarily the regulatory framework, but that's your agreement in terms of how you get access. That's clear. Okay. And just to make the point that an updated data access matrix was shared with ORDAG earlier this week, so that is going through the process around being agreed. The other aspect around the regulatory framework is the REC charging schedule, which sets out the costs for accessing each of the EES and GES and the associated charges for the types of services that are provided. So that that is due to be published, I believe. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's next week. And finally, the point to make around the service definitions is that these service definitions also do include the specific reports that are available as standard reports from both EES and GES. Okay. We move on to the next slide. So as part of our transition activities, as I mentioned earlier, we are preparing to issue access agreements to all parties who are affected by this, and that ultimately depends on whether you're a non-REC party, a REC or a REC party, and the type of service that you have. Our current thinking is that there are 3 buckets. So those customers of DES that currently have a contract post the 18th of July, those applications that won't be, those in-flight applications that won't be complete by the 1st of May, and those customers who have whose contracts will expire pre-18th of July. So for the first bucket, where you have a contract post 18th of July, we will arrange for an access agreement to be sent to you, and that access will continue from CSS go live. For those applications that are in flight with ExoServe that won't be complete by the 1st of May, we are working quite closely with ExoServe at the moment to work through what that application is, obtain all the handover information, and we will work very closely with them over the next few months in the lead up to go live, so that your application can be processed under REC governance following the 18th of July, when all the REC version 3 schedules become active. Where your agreement, if your agreement does expire pre the 18th of July, then we will work with ExoServe again to identify who you are, and your effective date in your access agreement will be before the 18th of July, so that you have that cover moving forward. So we are planning to issue those access agreements to you in early May, and before that happens, we will send some communications out to let you know that it's coming and what's going to change. And again, we're working very closely with ExoServe on this, so we're sharing information and making sure that we're aligned on that. If you are an existing if you are an existing EES user and you would like access to the REL information like we've spoken to today, you will need to contact the code manager and just confirm that you would like that access, and we will make sure that we communicate with both EES and GES accordingly and make sure that it's provisioned for you. Okay. Moving on. Finally, we've got this is a very, very simple view of the process that you would need to take if you don't have an existing access agreement, or you don't have an existing contract with either EES or GES in place, and you would like to you're a fresh applicant essentially, and you on post the 18th of July you would like to make an application to us to obtain access to GES and EES. We would need you to submit an application via the REC portal, and we as a code manager would assess that application based on the data access schedule and the data access matrix to say, okay, you would like these services, and are you entitled to these services based on your role as set out in that data access matrix. We would then need you to complete an information and data security assessment as set out in the data access schedule, and we will be publishing updated guidance on what this ISDP will contain for CSS users in late April. Following that, we would need then to arrange for you to sign an access agreement, and this again is a standardized access agreement. The only difference will be where you specify the specific service that you need. So I believe that access agreement is available on the qualification and maintenance schedule. It will be updated to reflect the JES specifics, and we will sort of tailor it to your specific services that you require, and then send that to you via DocuSign, so that you can sign it, and then Recco can sign it, and then we will provision access with CNC Group and ExoServe as appropriate, and notify you that access has been provisioned. And so if there are any issues after that point, then please do get in touch, and we will work with ExoServe and CNC to get that access provisioned appropriately. At this stage, I would like to hand over to Andrew Wallace, who's going to take over and talk to you about testing and the service desk.
Thanks, Prashant. So morning all, Andrew Wallace, Recco. I'm the switching program implementation lead. Sorry, can we go on to the next slide? Thank you very much. So just by way of a small bit of background, so Recco has contracted with CNC to provide the EES, previously known as ECHOs, and I think everyone's done very well on the call so far in trying to get the new kind of terminology right. And we're working with CNC on the changes needed for CSS Go Live, and Recco will be responsible for the JES, contracting with ExoServe for that service from CSS Go Live. So I'll just cover a couple of areas in the next few slides relating to testing and service desk roles, then, and happy to take any questions on those. So from this slide, and to reiterate what I said at the seminar on Tuesday on testing, then parties will have an opportunity to test on EES and the JES API and portal. Both EES and JES have test environments that are available ahead of CSS Go Live to support party readiness. Worth noting that we are still in discussions with ExoServe and CNC about provision and opportunity for testing post CSS Go Live, and I think that's wrapped up in a kind of broader consideration by the programme on post CS Go Live environments. So on the slide, we've added some details on who to contact if you're interested in testing for JES. It's ExoServe. For ESS, so EES, it's the Rec Code Manager who will assess the request and then pass this over once they're satisfied to CNC to provision the service. We can move on to the next slide. So this next section is providing you with an overview on who you would contact if you've got a query. So I think the first point to note is that the various service desks that you could contact are not integrated at this point in time. So which service desk you contact depends on the type of query that you have. We've got some examples on the next slide to kind of give you a bit more information on that. So the actual kind of information on which service desk you would contact is being refined at the moment and will be communicated to parties as part of the Code Manager communication plan. And so broadly, there is a Code Manager Rec portal service desk. So once you log on to the Rec portal, you can access it via that. Switching operator related queries go via the switching portal, and EES and GS queries go via their technical service desks. So the code manager, DCC, EES and GS will review how this is working in live operation to maintain that clarity on roles and responsibilities. So we know which service desk is responsible for which type of question, to refine that in live operation, because inevitably new questions will come up, and we'll communicate that to parties. So if we move on to the last slide. So in the table on this slide, we set out the key instances where we think queries could arise, to give you a flavour of the approach. As I said, this will be confirmed to parties ahead of CSS Go Live, and will be maintained and updated as necessary in live operation. So we've got 5 categories in the table. The first one relates to technical services, and I think what we mean here is, if you're using the EES or the GS and you can't access the portal, you sent a message and you're not getting an API response, the portal refresh rate is really slow. Well, they are kind of technical queries which should be sent to the EES and the GS service provider help desk. If you've got MAU password reset questions, then they go via the code manager. The code manager will do the necessary checks to make sure that they understand who is making that request. And I think user password resets are self-serve, so not for the service desks. So that's an example of the type of guidance that we'd look to provide. On data, I think broadly the inquiry services take data from different sources and mirror that data back to the market. So it's important that the queries go to the best kind of service desk that's able to handle that particular query. So for example, if you had a question that the red address data that you were looking at on the EES was not correct, or the registration data is not correct, well, that's data that's provided via the CSS. So the service desk to contact in that instance would be the switching operator. And if it's data that's not CSS related, so it's non-registration data, then those queries should go to the code manager. The other kind of categories we've got on the table are queries that would go to the code manager about the inquiry services. So, for example, anyone can raise a rec change to amend the services themselves. So if you wanted to kind of raise a change, then you would raise that via the rec portal with the code manager. If you've got queries about the obligations that EES and GS have, or kind of what your obligations are as a user, again, they would go to the code manager via the portal. And queries about access to the services. So you're a new entrant, or you want to change your access. Again, those queries would go to the code manager. So I say this is the model that we are kind of using for CSS Go Live, and obviously we'll review it in live operation and provide that guidance to parties on who they would contact in which particular instances. That was it from me.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really helpful, and Prashant as well. So any further questions around sort of access and service aspects at all from anyone?
Hello, Andrew. We have a question raised through the chat.
Yeah.
We currently can't get access to live GES as it is currently not under Reco, and we can't apply to get access until the 18th of July. This impacts development as we can't get access to test the live service until it is live. Is this being looked at currently? We are a TPI.
Thanks, Barraj. Andrew, is that something?
So I think I think my understanding is that ExoServe isn't going to be progressing any more kind of applications for access to the gas inquiry service in its current form from, I think, the 1st of May. After that, responsibility will be handed over to the code manager. I think this is an area where it's helpful for parties to notify their interest via the REC portal. Probably Prashant to kind of come in now on what our approach is and when we'll be able to start progressing those applications under the REC.
That's right. Thanks, Andrew. So I guess we're working very closely with ExoServe on any in-flight applications. So I guess my question would be, have you already made this application, or is this a fresh application that you haven't yet made? It would be helpful to understand that, and then assuming that it's a fresh application that hasn't been made, then we can, if you get in touch with the REC inquiries mailbox, then we can get in touch and work out exactly what you need and talk to ExoServe around what we do post the 1st of May. But if it's a joint application, if it's a joint application, then we're working with ExoServe to get the overall list of joint of in-flight applications, and working out where ExoServe has progressed them, and where we would then need to take over in terms of that process. So how far has it gone through in terms of the application process, and where it needs to go to sort of get ready for go live.
So am I hearing at this point the most appropriate sort of next step for the party involved is to engage with the REC manager on this?
Assuming it's a brand new application, and if it's an in-flight application, then we will get in touch with you as we are working through that list with ExoServe.
Okay, thank you. I hope that helps. Any further questions or points of clarification on the access or queries? No, I'm not seeing anything. Anything coming through, Barraj, on the chat?
Nope, no further questions.
Great, thanks. Okay, I will.
Hi, Andrew. Sorry, I had my hand up. I don't know if it was just not visible.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
It's Lisa, sorry, from Gazprom. I just wanted to ask, we raised a query around a last access report that we receive currently via the data inquiry service for gas, and I was referred to the technical document for JES, and that refers to a couple of reports, performance and a user report. Within that, it then talks about a data specification for those reports, and I've raised a query via the REC, and they've referred me back to Ofgem and said that the document is currently owned by Ofgem, and that I need to pick it up with yourselves. So I've then emailed Switching PMO and asked them if I can find out what that data specification is to make sure that we can continue receiving that report, because we kind of use it to make sure that all the users that we're paying for, we've got access for, are using the service, or if they're not, we can remove them via our LSO access.
Can I pick up on this one?
Please do, Andrew.
Yeah. Hi, Lisa.
Hiya.
So our expectation is that the existing report that's available to users, to parties such as yourselves, on kind of how many users you have, that is being retained under the new service. I think what you're also asking for is a bit more clarification on exactly what the reports are that are referenced in in the various documentation. So I will pick that up and add that to the FAQs. My understanding is that those report and specifications will be added to the REC data specification, but I will pick that up and clarify that in the FAQs.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Lisa. Anything else from anyone?
Maybe a hand raised by Rob Lock, but it might be a legacy. I can check.
Hi, Rob. Do you still have a question?
Sorry, no, that's a legacy hand.
No worries. So I think again we've had another useful session today. So thanks to everyone for joining and for the presenters and the engagement from everyone. I think key takeaway from this is I think some queries around and further aspects around certainly training, looking at sort of the end-to-end address process and how that works. We'll bring back the role display issue to the next data working group as well, as a number of I suppose key points. There's a few other things. We'll reissue the slides and so on too. So I was probably going to wrap up there, and I think the next we're grateful for feedback on the I suppose the 2 sessions that we've run, and if there is any further that parties want, hopefully this has provided the necessary updates and guidance appropriate. Conscious about the separate training point which we'll be picking up as well, but please do provide some feedback to us on this. It would be really helpful. So all that leads me to, I don't know if there were any other AOBs from anyone. I had one that I'll pick up. So from this is I suppose a mechanical point around sort of data working group anyway. So the next data working group, as I've mentioned, is on 25th of Monday, the 25th of April. PMO have issued this morning change request D131, which is an update to the data cleanse catalogue, which reflects the changes in data cleanse prioritization and a latest position following on from DA 605, a milestone that was approved at the last implementation group. So that CR has now gone to industry consultation. So you should have that in your inboxes this morning. We welcome feedback on that as part of the consultation process, and it is just a documentation update to reflect that position, and we'll be looking to take a decision on that CR on the 25th of April. We've got, I think, a fair few actions to take away, so we'll take those away. The recordings of both this and the previous session are available on, will be available on Salesforce. I think they're also going to be available on the REC portal as well. And we'll publish a note of this as well, and we'll issue updated slides too. So hopefully that will provide everything for parties, to listen back and so on as well. So if there's nothing more, I'll thank everyone and wish you all a good weekend, and speak to many of you on the 25th. So thanks very much, and if you don't speak before, have a good Easter break if you're going to be away. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.